The annual sales volume of the Synthes Group company was already approaching more than $20 billion. Electronics, cars, communications, heavy industry, clothing, food, these are not all the industries that the company owned. For many years now, the Synthes Group company has been considered one of the richest and most developed in the country. Jack Brown was finally approved to work for this company. He was from a rural area and had a college education. On this occasion, my father organized a small party and invited guests. Jack proudly told guests that he had been assigned to the strategic planning department, and no matter what, he was just a janitor. But the specifics of the work differed from garbage removal, cleaning of premises, and other nonsense. Jack did tedious and naturally dirty work, but this no longer suited him. So he began to learn English, became familiar with drawing up business plans, and gritting his teeth, gave it his all. And one fine moment, everything changed. In the Wilson family that owned the company, there was no one who did not know the name Jack Brown. When they had to deal with any kind of incident, including dirty cases, they turned to him only. After 13 years at the company, no one knew the hidden truth about the Wilson family better than Jack. As a result, Jack received the full trust of the company and the Wilson family. They could easily deposit huge sums of money into his personal account without worrying about the consequences. The financial director called Jack and said that he needed to temporarily leave for another country, and for this purpose, $700 million would be transferred to his account. Jack replied that this was a huge amount, but the director said that he trusted Jack more than his own wife. Jack received complete trust and knew that his life was just beginning. While at the airport, Jack looked at the plane departures board and looked for the line with his flight. Having arrived safely, Jack was already leaving the airport when two strangers in suits approached him. They greeted him and said that it must not be easy, because the path is not close. Jack looked at the strangers in disbelief. He didn't know them, but they knew his name. He asked what they were doing here, since his arrival was supposed to remain a secret. The strangers replied that they were tasked with meeting Jack and helping him upon his arrival. Suddenly, Jack felt something hard poke into his back. It was the barrel of a gun. The fat man said menacingly that they were assigned to help, and Jack must silently follow them. The second stranger added that it was better to do as they told and not to escalate the situation. Jack wondered if this was the company's way of getting rid of him. Sitting in the car, they had already left the city, and Jack thought why this was happening to him. Because he worked like a dog and was devoted to the company for 13 years. He didn't understand what he could have done that they were doing this to him now. Jack asked the fat man to call the chairman of the company, but he refused. Then Jack sharply told them to call themselves and say that they had done everything that was required of them, and he would remain silent. And he would hide somewhere in Europe and not show his face until his death. The second one, who was driving, said that Jack should not talk nonsense and would rather think about his parents and wife. Jack was alarmed by this statement. He did not understand what his wife and his parents had to do with it. The fat man explained that the chairman told Jack not to worry about his family. They would be given good financial assistance, and his wife would be sent to America, where she could live in abundance and without problems. Jack became even more worried. He was involved in the corrupt practices of the company and did not believe that the family would receive any benefits. In addition, they would not even give them his severance pay. It is likely that the company will file a claim for damages, confiscate the property, and leave you without a penny. The car stopped in some forest clearing near a lake, and he was ordered to get out of the car. Jack walked to the shore of a lake whose name he didn't even know, but he felt only one thing: this lake would become his grave. Jack heard the sound of a cocked gun from behind and turned around. The fat man had already pointed the muzzle of a pistol at him. The boy woke up from his own scream and opened his eyes in fear. 3 months have passed since Jack woke up in this body, but he was constantly haunted by a dream from a past life. A pleasant young woman sitting in the front seat of the car turned and asked if Lucas was okay. In this body, his name was Lucas, and he looked at the woman. It was his mother. She is an actress, although she only starred in one film. It is said that after receiving a passionate courtship from her father, Lucas, who was a fan of hers, she disappeared from the screens. Brother Jimmy, playing on the phone, said that Lucas was sleeping and then suddenly jumped up. Mom asked if Lucas had a nightmare, but he replied that he was just a little surprised and not to worry. Mom said that Lucas has suddenly become so mature lately that she is confused. Jack understood her perfectly, because he himself was confused by this whole situation. He looked out the window and thought that today was exactly 30 years before his death. 3 months had passed since he woke up as Lucas, the youngest grandson of Richard Wilson, the founder of Synthes Group, about whom there were many legends. Lucas was the 10-year-old grandson of the family that ordered his death on the lake 30 years ago, and why he returned in Lucas's body. Jack did not find an answer. While working at Synthes Group, Jack did not remember meeting these people, who were his parents, because they were removed from the affairs of the family company. They couldn't even get close to the company office, and it all happened because of their wedding. Synthesis Group chairman Richard Wilson was angry with his son, who decided to marry a celebrity against his will. But due to Martha's pregnancy, they had to legalize their relationship, and later they were completely expelled from the company. The other siblings fought constantly to get the largest share of the company, but Lucas's parents shunned all this and just wanted to protect their family. Finally, the car arrived at the gate of Wilson's residence. Jack looked out the window, who knew he would end up here again. The residence consisted of 3 huge estates with an area of more than 3,000 kilometers. A huge castle with 3 ground floors and 2 underground, as well as parking for 50 cars. The guards greeted Heinrich and let him into the estate. Sitting in the car, Jack looked at the green lawn and remembered how he got rid of weeds as his first job. While Richard Wilson was still alive, Jack visited this estate more often than at home, but later this place was taken by Philip Wilson, Henry's older brother. Today was the birthday of the head of the company and family, Richard Wilson. In connection with this, a large number of important people were invited. That is why Henry had to come to the estate with his family and congratulate his father. Disapproving whispers were heard from all sides, and hostility towards the arriving family was felt. Jack thought so. Everyone completely ignored their arrival. After passing through this entire crowd, the family entered the main doors of the estate. Trying to show respect, Heinrich greeted loudly, but there was no answer. They entered the living room. The whole Wilson family was sitting at the table. These were Lucas's uncles and aunts. One of the relatives turned around with a dissatisfied look and said that they had finally arrived. They all dreamed of getting a tasty piece of meat called Synthesis Group, and each of them was the embodiment of greed, awaiting the death of their father. And then the red-haired woman, angry at their lateness, shouted that it was time to get rid of the habits of stormy youth and be on time. Jack looked at the woman and got the impression that he had seen her often. Heinrich apologized for being late and said that they could not arrive on time. The woman replied that all this was starting to irritate her. Jack remembered her. She was almost 70, but she constantly changed and brought her young lovers here. Caroline's character did not change. Jack remembered that he had suffered a lot from her. The woman flushed with anger and said sharply how dare the boy laugh at her. The family members sat and looked at Henry's family reproachfully. Jack tried to justify himself by saying that it was not laughter, he just coughed. Caroline couldn't stand it and jumped out of her chair, screaming, "How dare this boy lie to her?" One of those present tried to calm Caroline down, saying that they had not gathered here to sort things out and have hysterics. She tried to object, but saw everyone turn to the door. It was Richard Wilson, the head of the Synthesis Group family and company. Caroline immediately fell silent and bowed her head a little. The rest of the relatives also meekly lowered their heads and were afraid to look him in the eyes. When Henry's family saw Richard, they did the same. Jack looked at Richard. Now this was his grandfather, the head of Synthesis Group and a living legend. Richard almost went down the stairs, and everyone immediately stood up. Not only his employees, but also his own children were afraid of him. Working for Synthesis Group and the Wilson family, Jack had never met him in person, and now he saw who Richard Wilson was. To somehow break this uncomfortable pause, Heinrich said that they had also come. Richard looked silently towards their family. He looked at Jimmy, his grandson, who was shyly hiding behind his mother's skirt. It was Jimmy who was the reason that Henry and Martha had to get married, and which Richard Wilson could not completely resist. The next minute, Richard looked at Lucas, his youngest grandson. Jack forgot how to breathe for a second. His throat was dry and his palms became damp. Richard came almost close to his grandson, and Jack's legs began to shake. And suddenly Richard changed. He smiled and said that he was glad to see his grandchildren. He was disappointed that they rarely see each other. He put his hand on Lucas's head, stroked it, and said that he had something for the baby. Jack looked at Richard and could not understand why the head of the family was so kind to him. The family members looked at their father with bewilderment and with envy at Lucas, because Richard was always harsh with them. Caroline struggled to contain her indignation. The boy's parents were also in amazement, looking at how the grandfather admired his grandson. "Bring a birthday cake into the room. Richard Wilson turned 66 today." The birthday boy slowly leaned over and blew out the candles. Enthusiastic screams and loud applause were heard all around in honor of the head of the family. The chairman smiled and listened to congratulations and wishes addressed to him. Heinrich and Martha also joined in the congratulations and wished their father health and longevity. The children present at the celebration also pleased their grandfather with their congratulations. Lucas's brother Jimmy remained silent and constrained. He felt awkward in this company of his rich aunt and uncle. Jack stood among the guests and closely observed the behavior of his relatives. Suddenly, he heard someone ask his mother to bring water, but did not attach much importance to it. Jack looked back and saw Martha carrying a tray of glasses and alcoholic drinks to the next table. She was very kind, and compared to Caroline, never made trouble. At that moment, Caroline called out to her and ordered her to bring a glass of water with ice. And from the opposite side, a fat relative was already shouting at Martha, who told her to immediately remove the dirty dishes. The third relative scolded her rudely for moving slowly. There was anger lurking inside Jack. His relatives openly forced his mother to work when a dozen service personnel were present even without her. But Martha did not disagree. She collected the dirty dishes and took them into the house. His heart sank from what he saw, but he could not do anything, because for everyone present, Jack was a simple child and 10-year-old grandson Lucas. Mom noticed Lucas standing nearby, walked up to him and sat down on her knees. She carefully buttoned the button on his jacket and looked at her son. Then, gently stroking his cheek, she said that her son was the most handsome. Jack looked at Martha, who was now his mother, and realized that being in this body was incredibly unusual. But thanks to the warmth she gave to Lucas, she helped Jack adapt quickly. Suddenly, she quickly jumped up, hearing comments about unwashed dishes, and began collecting plates from the tables. Jack clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. He promised that one day he would make sure that his mother received the proper treatment. He noticed how coldly his grandfather behaved towards his parents, and all his relatives and friends tried to be like him. Hence, the general hostility towards their family. Richard Wilson was thanking the guests for their visit when he noticed Lucas standing nearby. He leaned over to his grandson again and said that he wanted to show Lucas the gift he had promised. Jack broke out in a cold sweat, if only his grandfather wouldn't ask if Lucas remembered what he was talking about, because Jack didn't know the answer to this question. Entering the children's room, Jack saw what Lucas wanted to see. It was a toy horse. It was brand new and probably very expensive. Richard smiled at his grandson and asked if he liked the gift. Jack tried to understand where this excessive care and kindness came from. Maybe he was tormented by his conscience for driving his father out of the company or for not once recognizing his mother as his son's wife. But since he ended up in this body, he will definitely check to what extent Richard Wilson's kindness will last. Jack smiled at his grandfather and said that he liked a real horse better than a plastic one. Richard thought it was a joke and decided to play along, saying that a real car was also cooler than a toy one. Jack decided to go even further and said that he would like a real boat that floats on the sea, and not a small boat for the bathroom. The smile immediately disappeared from Richard's face, and at that second Jack thought that he seemed to have gone too far. The grandfather looked at his grandson and asked what he meant by the word real. Jack had to answer as a child would answer, without hesitation, and he said, "The real thing is what Grandpa made. After all, Grandpa creates real ships and cars. That's all Lucas likes." Having given such an answer, Jack was worried about how the chairman took these words, and whether he passed the test. But, Richard replied, to have real cars and ships, you need to work a lot, experience a lot of things, and go through a lot of difficulties. Jack thought to himself, he was used. He did the dirtiest and hardest work, and then he died altogether, so Jack would not be frightened by these difficulties. But suddenly the chairman said that if he finished this school year with excellent grades in all subjects, then Grandfather would buy Lucas a real horse for his birthday. Jack had a university degree under his belt, and naturally, getting excellent grades in elementary school would be a piece of cake. Richard looked at Lucas and said he didn't seem sure he could handle it. Jack replied that he would try very hard to receive such a gift. Jack decided that he would change everything, just not right away and a little bit at a time, and you, dear and beloved YouTube viewer, also have a great opportunity to change something. For example, subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, and like. It will be very nice because I tried for you. Have a nice day. In the clearing where the festive buffet was taking place, Grandfather's assistant approached the boys and said that they had been ordered to be taken to the children's playroom. Jack looked at the assistant and his heart began to beat wildly. He recognized him. He would have recognized him from 1,000 other faces. This was the same man who organized Jack's murder. It was he who called him into his office, offered him money, and ordered him to secretly leave the country. On the way to the children's room, Jack could not calm down, but he understood that he needed to pull himself together. After all, now he's not Jack Brown, but Lucas Wilson. Entering the playroom, Bobby was the first to notice the toy horse and, pushing aside everyone in the aisle, ran towards it. Having climbed onto it, the boy said that he was the first to see it, the first to sit on it, which means he will ride alone. Jack's sense of injustice awoke again, even as a child. But Jimmy's older brother noticed Lucas's changed behavior and stopped him. It seems that Jimmy is used to the fact that no one puts him in anything, and the whole family is used to it. Jack smiled at Jimmy. He wasn't going to get used to it. He walked over to Bobby, who was swinging on his horse. First, we need to teach him not to be rude in the future and make a strong impression on his grandfather. Jack abruptly told the boy that it was his horse. Then he ordered the guy to get off the horse. But the boy said that he would do whatever he wanted and nothing would happen to him for it. The children laughed together. This horse cannot be Lucas's property. Jack kicked the horse hard and it began to rock violently. Bobby held on and shouted that he still wouldn't get off and would ride as long as he wanted. Jack calmly kicked again and the horse flew off the stand. Having fallen to the floor, the heavy toy crushed the boy's leg and he screamed in pain. One of the children shouted that he would call the adults now. Jack stood over the guy writhing in pain and said that he shouldn't touch what belongs to him. Bobby's mother ran in at the scream and was dumbfounded by what she saw. Next, Lucas's relatives appeared at the door. Jack looked at his mother, who also came running in response to the screams. Judging by her expression, Mom was very surprised, probably. Her son Lucas had never behaved like that. And the next second, Jack clearly felt a slap on his face. The enraged mother slapped Jack on the cheeks and could not calm down. Lucas's mother instantly ran up to her son and protected him from another blow from the injured boy. Holding her son tightly, she just repeated, "Sorry, sorry." Mom whispered that he should not be afraid of anything. She was there and would protect him. At that moment, the door to the game room opened, and Richard Wilson walked in. He looked sternly at those present and said that there were guests outside, and they were making noise here. He told Bobby's mother to pick up her son and go to the hospital. Richard told everyone to leave, everyone except Lucas. Jack told his mom that everything would be fine and they would see each other a little later. Left alone, the grandfather asked his grandson if he had done it. Jack replied that he was the one who broke the horse. Richard asked another question. Why did he break it and do this to the boy? Jack replied that the horse was his gift and Bobby wanted to take it away, so he broke it. It's better that no one gets it than him. He didn't want to give it to anyone. Richard smiled. Jack knew that the chairman would like this cruelty. The cruelty of the leader of an empire who does not want to lose an inch of land. Richard said that although Lucas didn't mean to hurt Bobby, he did get hurt, so his grandson will be punished. The grandfather turned to the door and told his grandson to follow him. Jack followed Richard into the Great Hall and the door closed behind him. Although the office of the chairman of Synthes Group was located on the 27th floor of the company's official office, all important decisions were made here, in the mansion. Only the richest and most influential members of the corporation could enter here. Jack was a member of this corporation for more than 10 years, but he never managed to get here. And now he is here. Grandpa pointed out a place where Lucas could wait while the meeting was going on. Jack noticed that in the place where his father Heinrich should sit, Kevin, his uncle's eldest son, was now sitting, but he was only 20 years old. Perhaps he has already been appointed as grandfather's successor. Richard looked at everyone and asked what they thought about the problem and how it could all turn out. One of those present said that this aristocrat is stubborn. The end of his term is approaching, but he does not give up. The only hope is that he will not act recklessly. The chairman expressed his concern the possibility cannot be ruled out that the rival could recruit his own army. Jack tried to analyze what was said. Tenure, suppression, the army. It seemed that the conversation was not about the company, but about the country. The employees suggested that we consider other methods. More than 1 million people from all over the country have already gathered. And if the military gets involved, perhaps 2. Now a flame of anger has broken out in the ranks of the rebels. If it is extinguished, they will be afraid. But if the army comes to help, then it is like pouring oil on the fire. Even the current government understood this. Richard menacingly asked if he wanted to say that we must prepare for an attack by the government. And next year the president will be in opposition. The employee replied that he did not completely rule out such a possibility. The chairman got mad and shouted that it could be the other way around, and in general, he was not going to waste his time listening to different assumptions. He shouted at the deputy why he was silent and told him to express his point of view. The deputy stood up and said that the government would not collapse, and the successor was already known, and these rallies and demonstrations had been going on for 7 years since the advent of the new government, but now it had become more serious. Jack thought that all this was very strange. In 3 days there would be a statement about the president's surrender. The Blue House should already begin to take shape around this time, and Synthes Group does not know about this information. He was in amazement. This was a meeting from the 80s, but no matter how chaotic the situation was, all they could say was who was in line behind whom. Jack expected to see the development of an effective strategy to respond to the changes taking place, as well as any predictions about how society and the world as a whole will develop in the future. Well, or at least hear adequate information that ordinary office workers would not have thought of. And in the end, they argued until the very end about who was behind whom. The chairman announced that the meeting was over and told everyone to gather information and listen carefully. The employee stood up from the table, bowed respectfully, and left the office. Richard turned to his grandson and said Lucas could get up. But Jack sat on his knees for so long that his legs went numb and he couldn't get up. The chairman said it was great that Lucas had sat in an awkward position for so long without showing that he was in pain or uncomfortable. Richard added that not every adult could show such patience and perseverance, but Lucas overcame these difficulties. Jack realized that the chairman liked his behavior, and he replied that he listened and did not notice how time flew by, so he did not feel tired in his legs. Richard said that he had recently noticed significant changes in Lucas's behavior and asked what was causing it. Jack decided that he would no longer remain silent and endure. He would now say everything he wanted to say. He plucked up courage and said that he had to endure only because his father and mother did not act. Jack added that he is very angry now and is not going to hold back any longer. He decided to add some acting and decided that some tears would be right on point. And the next second the grandfather knelt in front of his grandson and hugged him tightly. Jack managed to evoke the chairman's sympathy, a reaction he could not even imagine. He decided that now was the time to shock Richard once again. Jack quietly asked the chairman to have Grandpa make friends with all three. Richard said that he doesn't quite understand what they are talking about, and who the three grandson is asking him to be friends with. Jack replied that he meant exactly what his grandfather had said earlier at the meeting. He added that if it is known who will become the next president, then why not make friends with all three candidates? Jack continued to say that they were all so powerful that any one of them could easily take this position. The chairman said that this was a good idea, because the more friends, the better. He laughed loudly and added that they had a great conversation. Jack was delighted with himself. He smiled back at the chairman. Richard suggested that Lucas play somewhere while his grandfather worked. Then he looked back to his grandson and said if he saw Kevin, he should tell him to come into the office. Jack said that he would call Kevin, and satisfied went out into the corridor. Left alone, the chairman called someone and told him to take care of all three and treat them like VIPs. Richard added that they should not forget to say that they hope for a successful resolution of this situation. After hanging up the phone, the chairman remembered the conversation with his grandson, and could not believe that a 10-year-old grandson was saying such serious things. At that moment, Kevin looked into the office and asked the chairman if he could come in. Richard replied that now he is not a chairman for him, but just a grandfather. Richard said that Kevin not only listened in the meeting today, but perhaps also thought. He clarified that now he is asking this not as a chairman, but as a grandfather, so he can answer and not be afraid. Kevin said that the protesters are at their peak right now, and he thinks if the president sends in the military, it will become much quieter and calmer. This means that the current government will continue to govern, and the friend and successor of the current government will become the next president. Richard was expecting this answer and said that Kevin should join him in line. Kevin looked at his grandfather in bewilderment. He did not fully understand what kind of game the chairman was playing. Richard said that was all, returned to his desk, and told Kevin to leave. He sat down in a chair and closed his eyes, resolving issues and making decisions. Both business and political took too much energy. Jack stood around the corner and watched Kevin, who had left the chairman's office and was now standing in the hallway. It would be nice if he was the eldest grandson. Returning home, Martha asked Heinrich what she and her father were talking about. Heinrich replied that the chairman advised him to focus on educating his sons well. His father looked in the rearview mirror and said that he did not intend to scold him for what happened at his grandfather's estate today. Lucas asked for an apology, and his father said that he had already received his punishment, and most importantly, that he understood his mistake. The father added that the grandfather was going to send him and his brother Jimmy to a personal teacher. Jimmy exclaimed dissatisfiedly he didn't really like this idea. The father replied that it was okay if he didn't want to, and then asked Lucas if he liked his grandfather's proposal. Jack thought that the teacher should have learned from him, but since the chairman decided so, he would not resist. He answered his father that he agreed to have a personal teacher, and his father said that he would prepare everything for this. Jimmy leaned over to Jack and said that Lucas was great today for making idiot Bobby cry. Then he turned away and stared out the window, dreaming about something. It seems he also had a lot accumulated. There was a report on TV from some politician about how we are now in an era when deeply rooted conflicts and antagonisms between people have resulted in a national crisis. And the announcement of the declaration adopted by the president on June 29th, 1987 became the official declaration of the government. There was also news on another channel, where another politician continued to say that a new era of supreme power races was beginning. Jack listened, drank juice from a straw, and wondered what Richard Wilson should do now. Jack was returning from school and noticed a very familiar car at the entrance of their house. On the territory, he met a gardener who told him that his grandfather had come to visit them. And suddenly, Jack heard conversations in the house. The conversation took place in a raised voice. Martha sat opposite Richard and repeated once again that neither she nor Heinrich asked for a share in the Synthes Group company. Richard was angry. He personally came with such a proposal, and now he is being refused. And Martha continued to say that she understood the chairman's intentions to raise Lucas so that he could succeed in the Synthes Group company. But he is only 10 years old, and she would like him to decide for himself what to do when he grows up. Richard said that doesn't she understand what it means to give away a share of the company? Besides, he was going to take them back as children. But she refuses the last chance that Richard gives them. Martha apologized, but replied that she and Heinrich were trying to raise Lucas so that he could make his own decisions. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and Martha and Richard turned around. Lucas stood on the threshold. The chairman quickly stood up, walked up to his grandson, picked him up and said that he had returned early from school. Although grandfather was no longer young, Jack felt that he was very strong. He looked at his mother, who usually remained silent in the presence of her grandfather, but now she boldly decided to speak out about her son's problems. It was very unusual and at the same time touching. Jack asked why his grandfather was angry, but he replied that his grandson only thought so because he raised his voice a little. But Mom said that everything was fine and she and Grandpa were just talking. Well, of course, they think he's small and think that Lucas doesn't understand anything. Lucas asked his mother and grandfather not to fight over him. He would really do what he wanted when he grew up. Richard silently sat back on the sofa and thought about something. The grandfather, who was not afraid of anything, must have been excited now to hear this from his own grandson. Jack decided it was time to bring them back to reality and said that when he grew up, he would become the boss of a big company, like his grandfather. Grandfather came to his senses and, having dispersed, said that, in the end, you can't deceive the blood. It happens that this manifests itself even after a generation. Richard turned to Martha and asked what she could now say to his grandson's statement. Tears appeared in Martha's eyes. Did her son really want to become a leader and connect his life with lies and corruption? She said that she wanted to make tea, and the grandfather asked her to bring it to his grandson's room. Richard added that he had a story he wanted to tell Lucas. Jack noticed that his mother was crying. He wanted to hope that it was because his grandfather treated her like a real legal daughter-in-law, and not the way other relatives treated her. Having settled down in the children's room, Grandfather asked if Lucas remembered the conversation that took place in his office. Jack said that that day he proposed to become friends with those 3 influential people. Richard replied that he followed his advice, sent them gifts, and was very friendly to them. Jack thought how quickly his grandfather acted. He had already managed to pay a bribe. The chairman continued by saying that starting today, events have taken a strange turn. Grandpa wanted everyone to get along, but he started arguing. The second and third places decided to team up to win the first. And now he also needs to choose a side. And each of those 3 who dream of taking the place of president wants to become something like a headman. Jack decided to clarify. That is, if the second and third places team up and win, then they will become the headman and deputy. But Grandfather replied that there is no deputy in running the country, only the headman. Jack asked if there is no deputy, then what is the point of them uniting? Because only one will become the headman. The chairman was struck by the idea that this was false information, and they had not united. The grandson replied that the grandfather was right, because the third is unlikely to help the second without receiving anything in return. The grandfather patted his grandson on the head and asked in surprise how he could be so smart. The car was racing along a country highway and moving further and further away from the house where Jack lived. Jack became more and more worried about what he had to do. He told his parents that he really wanted to look at the coast of the Western Sea, because as the geography teacher said, this is the only place where it connects with the northern one. In fact, the reason lay elsewhere. He urgently needed to check something. Jack wanted to see with his own eyes what he looked like now in Jack Brown's body. And now, after a short time, he was already standing in front of a familiar sign. This was Jack's house, and he wondered what he would say when he saw his parents. Jack automatically covered his mouth with his hand. The main thing was not to call them Mom and Dad. Jack looked out the window and saw his parents. He stood on the street and looked at them, tears rolling down from his eyes. Jack couldn't calm down. They really existed. Suddenly, his mother appeared in front of him. She asked the baby what happened to him. Next, Jack's father came out with the same question, and his mother said that the boy was standing in front of their house and crying. The parents worriedly asked if he was lost, but Jack lied, saying that he was looking for his friend's house. They didn't recognize him, and he said he was looking for a boy named Jack. The parents looked at the baby in surprise and said that there seemed to be no boy with that name nearby. But Mom said that you can ask Liliana. Maybe she has classmates or friends with that name. Jack asked in surprise who Liliana was. He didn't know any girls with that name. The parents said that Liliana was their daughter. Jack was even more surprised in his previous life. In their house, he did not have a sister named Liliana, and his parents do not know him. He was horrified because he realized that a man named Jack Brown did not exist. Richard Wilson sat in his office and looked at an article that published the results of the past elections. A few months ago, when the current government announced its surrender, all the conglomerates of the financial group began to help Yang and Kim. It was certain that one of them would become the next president. But the chairman listened to his grandson, sending an expensive gift to the candidate from the ruling party and made small gifts to Yang and Kim. Richard was now convinced of how useful his grandson's advice was to him. Jack read the same newspaper and thought that nothing was still different from what it was in his previous life. Having met his real parents, Jack could not find a place for himself and could not calm down. Because Jack does not exist in the past, and his daughter took his place. This meant that the details of the future recorded in his memory until now might differ. Jack also did not exclude the possibility that the future began to change due to changes in the soul of Chairman Richard Wilson, who was beginning to like Jack. And if it changes, then Jack's most powerful weapon, knowledge of the future, may become useless. By the time Jack is 20 years old, he must prepare the groundwork to absorb Synthesis Group. Within 10 years, Richard Wilson will be lying in a hospital bed awaiting death. This means that before that, he must take possession of as many shares as possible for himself and his father. If everything goes well, then Jack will be able to start fighting with his uncle, Philip Wilson. In addition, he must try to prevent his death in a car accident that occurred on his 20th birthday. He lived like Jack Brown, cleaning up after everyone in this company, so there is no one more worthy than him. In addition, all members of the Wilson family would have to die in a car accident. He had not looked into this before, which was a pity. After analyzing his entire plan, Jack decided that he first needed to avoid his own death. And then one thought occurred to Jack how much the future would change if he helped Richard Wilson live longer. Suddenly, his mother looked into the room and told Lucas that it was time for him to get ready. His grandfather was waiting for him. The only thing left to do now was to check the results of your actions and act very carefully. Lucas arrived at the Wilson estate and joyfully ran towards his grandfather. Jack still couldn't get used to it, but he couldn't help but do it either. Grandfather said that there would be no one here except them, and ordered them to sit down at the table. Jack was not at all surprised that his grandfather wanted to be alone with his grandson. He looked at Richard and realized that he was incredibly happy that his bet in the presidential election had worked. But Jack did not show that he understood this. He only asked why his grandfather was in such a good mood. Richard replied that he was very glad to see Lucas and would buy him anything he wanted. Jack asked the chairman that his generosity was most likely due to the fact that his grandfather found out about his grades. But Richard replied that he had already forgotten about their agreement. Jack behaved as little boys usually brag and said that he got excellent marks in all subjects. The chairman was surprised by this, and the grandson added that he was the only one in the class who received 100 points. Grandfather laughed and said that it was too late now and he wouldn't be able to buy him a real horse right now. Jack chuckled quietly. He didn't need the horse, it was just a cover to get more. He told his grandfather that everything was fine because he doesn't even know how to ride a horse yet, but when he learns, then he can buy. Jack then asked Richard a question. If not because of the promise, then why did he invite him to visit? The chairman replied that thanks to Lucas, grandfather's company had become even bigger, which meant he would earn even more money. Then Jack asked if his grandfather could give him even more than he promised. The chairman replied that not only was it bigger, but it was better. But what could be bigger and better than a horse? And Jack replied that if they bought a horse, it would be kept on his grandfather's ranch on the island, and Lucas would not be able to ride there every day. At that moment, there was a knock and the servants entered the room. They delivered a delicious dinner for the grandfather and grandson. While they were setting the table, grandfather said that the horse option was really not rational and they would think about it during the meal. At dinner, grandfather said that we could build another ranch, then we could ride horses every day. This was exactly the answer Jack wanted to hear. Jack pretended to be a joyful child and rushed to hug his grandfather for such a generous gift. Now the most important thing is where this ranch will be located. Filled with joyful emotions, Lucas asked where this ranch was, to which his grandfather replied that he would build it on the northern side of Seoul. But this was not at all the place that Jack needed. He made a sad expression on his face and said that they live in a completely different area and it is far away. Grandfather smiled and replied that there was no ranch nearby that could be purchased. And the resourceful grandson suggested that it could be simply built because his grandfather could do it. Jack once again made his grandfather laugh, but he didn't understand what he said so funny. Finally, the chairman calmed down and said that out of 48 branches, he had created only 19, and the rest were captured. Most of the companies to which he had a hand were created in the early days of the existence of Synthis Group at first. Everything had to be done by oneself, and then persistence and the desire to develop appeared. Jack was looking forward to his grandfather finishing the story about the history of the company, and finally making his decision. The chairman replied that this is why he really liked the idea of building a ranch. Richard shouted to one of his assistants and ordered him to bring him a map. A minute later, the card was already in the office. All that remained was to make sure that the decisions of Jack and the chairman coincided. The chairman laid out the map on the table and said that now he will see how good Lucas has an eye. The grandfather handed his grandson a red marker and told him to mark on the map the place where he wanted to build a ranch. The ranches were also just a cover. Jack was going to secure the land in advance, the price of which would skyrocket in 10 or 20 years, and this would be a good help in the battle for the share of Synthis Group. Richard kept a close eye on Lucas and advised him to choose wisely, preferably not in the city center. And when Jack circled the area he needed, the chairman said with surprise that it was a little far from Lucas's house. But he respected his grandson's opinion and agreed. The chairman again called the assistant and, handing him the map, ordered to urgently find out everything about the condition of this land. After the doors closed, grandfather said that we could start eating. At dinner, the chairman asked how Lucas was doing at school and how many friends he had. Jack answered positively, but in fact he had no friends. How could he be friends with children when he was already 40? Then the assistant entered the room again and said that he had brought information about the selected lands. He explained that the area is called the South Bank and has a limited development area. It is a rural area with cucumber and melon fields. There are poor transport links and a poor population of residents, so the likelihood of development is very low. The president thought, "This means there is no competition there and building a ranch will not be difficult." Jack watched as the chairman tapped his finger on the table and waited impatiently to see what decision Richard would ultimately make. Finally, Wilson gave orders to find out what land could be purchased there with an area of at least 150,000 square meters. Jack sighed imperceptibly. He managed to force the chairman to do what he had in mind. When the assistant left again, Richard turned to his grandson and said that if he were in his place, he would not buy this land. It was a meager dirt hole. It will take a lot of effort and time for it to generate income, and perhaps this will not happen at all. Perhaps it is not worth buying this particular plot. To which Jack replied that no one knows the future, much less how the country's infrastructure will develop. Grandfather agreed that he did not exclude the possibility that in 20 to 30 years, this land would have great value, which Lucas would see. Jack replied that he would try to maintain and increase these investments. But Jack wasn't going to wait that long. He knew that within 2 years a new city would stand on this land. The chairman could not even imagine that he had just given Jack 150,000 square meters in the center of the future new city of Bundon. One of the following days, his daughter Caroline and her husband Oliver stood in the president's office, who announced that he wanted to run for deputies of the National Assembly. Caroline said that he had good support among the middle class and could become an additional force for his father. Richard replied that he already had a deputy ready to come running at a moment's notice, and his son-in-law should be content with what he now had. Caroline got angry and asked if her father meant that he felt sorry for using the money for his husband. The chairman reminded them that it was he who helped Oliver get a job in the prosecutor general's office, and he now wants to repay him by running for deputies. Oliver felt awkward and began muttering apologies under his breath. But Katrina immediately shut his mouth and continued to put pressure on her father, saying that her husband did not deserve such treatment. He was from a family of the best lawyers in the country. Richard smiled evilly and reminded him that it was he, using his strength, power, and money, who made his father the chief prosecutor and Oliver his deputy. All these actions were done in order to turn them into loyal dogs and protect Cyntha's group. Oliver stood red as a lobster. He already regretted that he had agreed to his wife's idea. The chairman told Oliver to get rid of this nonsense in his head and just continue to live as he lives now, without knowing worries and hardships. Richard then reminded them that vain greed and greed often lead to ruin. Caroline looked at her father with bewilderment. If he agreed, she made big plans for her husband's career and planned to get a big income from it. And then the chairman turned to her and said that she owned a department store and still dared to remain dissatisfied. Carolina realized that her father had figured out her plan to put her husband into politics and gain power, and then get rid of her brothers and take over the Cyntha's group. She humbly lowered her head and asked her father for forgiveness. And the chairman told them to be content with what they had, and if the efficiency of the department store management decreased, then he would take it away too. All this time, Jack was in the office. He sat quietly on the sofa in the corner of the office and saw everything that was happening. He knew very well the imperious character of Caroline, who was ready to go over her head to achieve her goal. It must be very disappointing for her to watch how her older brothers, one after another, take over, and she herself was removed from the list of heirs. Jack understood that if they did not have the support of the chairman, then getting rid of them would not be difficult. When Caroline and her husband left the office, Richard approached his grandson and asked if he was bored, to which Jack replied that he was reading a book. And then the chairman put some kind of envelope in front of Jack. He explained that these are the documents for the land that they spoke about earlier. Jack saw the numbers and said that the acquired area was much larger than what they agreed on. Richard praised his grandson for having an excellent memory and being good at math. Jack knew the chairman would like this, since memorizing accurate numbers in business is probably the basis of the basics. And Richard explained that there were several owners there with small plots, so he bought several. Jack immediately calculated in his head that in 2 or 3 years the compensation for the land would be more than $12 million. The current market value of an apartment in the city center was so much that in the future Jack could buy 200 such apartments with this money. The grandson ran up to his grandfather and, hugging him tightly, said that they would build the biggest ranch and buy many beautiful horses. Jack thought he might as well be a little nice since he received a gift of $16 billion. The following year was truly incredible as a directly elected president took office. He released a declaration that included proposals for cooperation and improvement of relations between several countries. All these political actions had a beneficial effect on the development of the country, where people began to move, and therefore housing prices soared several times. The government could no longer cope with such rising property prices and announced a plan to build 2 million houses. But prices continued to rise, and therefore a decision was made to build an entire city. Richard closely followed everything that was happening in the country and in the city, and when he learned about this news, he was completely shocked. The chairman asked the assistant if he remembered the day Richard gave Lucas the ranch property. He pointed to the map and showed his assistant that this was exactly the place where the new city would be built. Richard thought that childish naivety worked wonders. But in any case, the baby seemed to have thought through everything 100 steps ahead, and all this in just a year. But Richard was against buying this land. But his grandson insisted on this particular site on the map. The chairman told the assistant that Lucas would grow up to be a worthy leader and ordered him to take care of him. Because if Richard separated 3 or 4 companies and handed them over to him, then others would try to take them away. The assistant had to prevent this. Jack looked at the documents about the profit from the sale of part of the real estate, and the amount was staggering. He got rid of a small part of the land, and the profit was already 14 billion. He remembered the words of the chairman, who said that Lucas himself earned this money, so he can dispose of it at his own discretion. Further calculations predicted that in 30 years, this amount would increase and reach 100 billion. The next minute, there was a knock on the door, and Lucas's parents appeared on the threshold. They said that they wanted to talk to their son. They asked what Lucas was going to do with that money. Jack replied that he told his grandfather that he would keep the money in the bank. It seems they were worried that such a small boy could get a huge amount, and Jack decided to calm them down. Mom asked if Lucas might want to buy something, but Jack replied that he had everything he needed. Jack then added that what was more important was what they wanted to do with the money. And then an awkward moment came. Jack didn't understand why they were looking at him so surprised. Suddenly, the father stood up and silently walked towards the exit. Mom sat down with Lucas and said that Dad was very surprised, and added that they would talk about it later. Left alone in the room, Jack felt perplexed. Perhaps he had said something wrong. Martha found Heinrich in the courtyard of the house and decided to continue the conversation with him. She reassured her husband, saying that there was no need to worry about it. These were just the words of an immature child, and he clearly had good intentions. Heinrich replied that he was not angry, he just felt very ashamed at some point. He added that when Lucas said this, Heinrich's heart began to beat faster, and he thought that this was an opportunity that needed to be seized. Now he considered himself a pathetic father, drooling over his child's money. Martha reassured Heinrich, saying that this was really a lot of money, and it was the same with her. She thought that with such a sum, they could go abroad and live there together. Jack managed to overhear this conversation between his parents, and he realized that they really loved him very much. A little later, Jack chose the right moment and approached his father, saying that he wanted to ask him for forgiveness for making him angry. The father replied that he was not angry, but simply very surprised at that moment, then asked his son what he intended to do now. Jack looked seriously into Henry's eyes and replied that he would be the owner of a company that would become much stronger and more powerful than his grandfather's. The father listened carefully to his son and then suddenly burst out laughing. Of course, at that moment it seemed ridiculous. Syntez Group is the richest company in the country, and some child claims that he will build a larger company. The father said that he approved of his son's grandiose dreams and was making plans for the future. But Jack looked seriously at Heinrich and said that he needed his father's help. Heinrich replied that he was not at all interested in the affairs of the company. He had once studied business in England, but he was always interested in cinema. The son replied that his father said exactly what was needed, and, since he studied in England, perhaps he still had contacts of his classmates. The vice chairman of the company and eldest son, Philip Wilson, called Kevin, the eldest son of Uncle Lucas, and told him that this kid had already received 14 billion in compensation for the land, and when he dealt with the rest of the land, he would add another 10. Kevin replied that even if he just put this money in the bank, the interest would be about 1 billion and he could buy 20 apartments every month. Philip angrily shouted that Richard, who wouldn't give even 100 cents just like that, had given his grandson a whole ranch. In addition, he transferred these lands to him and gave Lucas the opportunity to dispose of them at his own discretion, and this was already a problem. Philip asked Kevin if the chairman had ever given him a meter of land or a bank book. This shows how much his grandfather devalues Kevin as a partner. Hearing this truth, Kevin lowered his head and felt like a pathetic idiot. When Philip calmed down a little, he told Kevin to keep a close eye on Henry's house and report on everything that happened there. At Lucas's house, everyone was eagerly awaiting the arrival of their guest. A pleasant young man came into the room, and my father introduced him. It was Larry Baker, my father's classmate in England. Larry held the position of chairman of the Invest Group company and came to their house at the invitation of Heinrich. Jack knew that in 30 years Invest Group would become a super asset management company with huge annual income. It's strange that he was his father's friend. Larry asked his parents for permission to talk to Lucas in person. The father introduced his son to his classmate and told Lucas to listen carefully to his uncle's advice. Larry put his briefcase on the floor and, sitting down on the sofa, said that he heard from his father that Lucas allegedly wants to become a businessman and create a company like his grandfather. Lucas replied that Larry didn't quite understand correctly. He wanted to lead the company more than his grandfather. The man said that the Synthes Group company is now the largest in the country, and to have a company larger than this is incredible greed. Jack again decided to correct Larry and replied that this was not greed, but his dream. The man said that Lucas was like his grandfather in his insatiability, and like his father in his dreams. Lucas wanted to clarify who Larry was, and he replied that he was the head of a large company, Invest Group, which was different from his grandfather's company. Larry explained that their company is in the business of making rich people even richer. And then Jack asked if it means that the Invest Group company will also be able to increase Lucas's money. Larry replied that only rich people can become clients of his company, and he is unlikely to be able to help Lucas with anything. Lucas replied, "It's strange that his father didn't say anything about his money, because now he has 14 billion in his account, and after the sale of the remaining land, 10 more will be added." In his past life, Jack met a lot of rich miners, but it was thanks to shares or a rich parent. But here the situation is completely different. Larry is probably now thinking about where a 12-year-old child gets such money, which will rise in value in 30 years and will already amount to hundreds of billions. Larry had been staring at one point for a couple of minutes, and, judging by his facial expression, comments here would be inappropriate. Jack decided to finally finish off Larry and handed him his own investment plan. Larry took the notebook and began silently studying the notes, graphs, and tables. At first there was attentiveness on his face, which gradually began to develop into surprise and shock. On the page with the plan for investing in company shares, he drew special attention. Jack took the juice and carefully observed what the final reaction would be from the head of the Invest Group company. Finally, Larry closed the notebook, looked carefully at Lucas, and asked with undisguised surprise how he knew all this at that age. Jack replied that he was simply smart beyond his years, and smiled childishly. Larry said that he might be smart, but not that smart no one would believe that this business plan was drawn up by a 12-year-old child. Larry asked a question that interested him regarding the fact that the plan included a clause about creating a company in America and then investing it back in Korea. Even experienced financiers could not think of this. Jack replied that they simply weren't Richard Wilson's grandchildren and didn't have the same big dreams as Lucas. Jack said that he has been visiting his grandfather's house every week for 3 years and even stays with him during school holidays to understand what they are talking about. Larry suggested that Lucas's grandfather, Richard Wilson, influenced the drawing up of this plan. Jack mentally felt relieved. He managed to get out of it, blaming everything on his grandfather and diverting suspicions from himself, and then added that he was always close to his grandfather, who said a lot of important things. Larry, having analyzed the conversation and, understanding the content of Lucas's business plan, made the appropriate conclusions for himself. Heinrich was standing in the yard when his friend Larry came out of the house and walked towards him. Larry asked why Henry did not say 14 billion. Henry responded that he didn't want Larry to be prejudiced because of money. Now Larry wanted to talk about Lucas. He said that his son is an unusual child, he is a genius. Henry agreed with Larry, saying that Lucas was doing very well in school, but his friend replied that that was not what he meant. At the end of the conversation, Larry said that he needed to think everything over carefully, and saying goodbye went to his car. After watching his friend go, Henry turned around, raised his head and looked out the window. He saw an ordinary 12-year-old boy looking at his father and making faces at him. A few days later, Larry visited Heinrich Wilson's house again to communicate with Lucas again. Jack politely greeted him and was ready for a new upcoming conversation. The main thing was not to get confused and stick to one version. Henry decided to organize the information in his head, and asked Lucas again whether he really used it in his business plan after finding out the information from his grandfather, to which he received the same answer. Larry took the business plan and said that in this case he did not need a book on investments. Jack had no choice but to use his grandfather as an excuse to force him to follow his concocted plan. Putting the documents away in his briefcase, Larry said that by the end of the year, they would have an investment company ready in America, and Lucas would own it 100%. In addition, he could keep his funds there as long as he wanted. Jack replied that they could decide such issues on their own, but he would have one request to Larry. Settling down on the sofa in the living room, Larry sighed and told Heinrich that Lucas was only going to invest 10 billion. And with the remaining 4 billion, he wants to create a film production company. After a short silence, Larry said that the first candidate for the post of general director of the film company was Heinrich. Heinrich asked in amazement whether what he had just heard about the film business was true. Larry informed Heinrich about the cost of creating one movie in Korea, and, after doing the math, said that at least 10 high-budget quality films could be created with 4 billion. Heinrich fell silent and thought about it, and Larry continued, "If you also invest, the amount will be many times larger." He added that if you simply offer money to Heinrich, he will definitely refuse, so Lucas asked Larry to create a film company for him. Larry continued to say that Lucas said that in the future, he would force his father to take the place of CEO in this company by any means. One of the following days, an assistant stood in the office of Chairman Richard Wilson. He said that in front of him was the personal file of Mr. Larry Baker. Richard knew very well about the Invest Group company, but the fact that Larry was a friend of Heinrich Wilson, his son, was news to the chairman. The assistant explained that they studied together in England and were classmates. He then expressed his opinion that this was very strange. Lucas was expected to simply put the money in the bank and receive interest on it. But it turned out that he decided to start an investment company. Richard instructed the assistant to meet with Larry personally to avoid suspicions that he had a desire to take Lucas's money. The assistant left, and the chairman thought that his grandson was quite smart. Having made an investment in an investment company, only interest was not enough for him, and in this he was very similar to his grandfather. In the summer of 1989, 2 million protesters demanded democracy and independence in the controlled republics of the Soviet Union, creating a 600-kilometer human chain called the Baltic Way. And in the fall of that year, the Hungarian government opened its western borders, which created a mass exodus of East German lords. And while the whole world was paying attention to the changes taking place in Eastern Europe, Jack focused on creating an investment company in New York. Jack had 98% of the shares, and the remaining 2% belonged to Larry Baker and his colleagues. And at the end of November of the same year, Jack and Larry arrived in New York. Jack stood in front of his company office and looked at the high-rise building. Larry said that the building looked a little shabby. He bought it inexpensively so as not to waste money on something useless. Seeing the name of the fantasy entertainment company, Larry smiled and said that it sounded a little naive and childish, and Jack thought that, starting with this company, he would still show everyone a real miracle. Jack was delighted. Everything inside was done modernly and tastefully. The office premises were light and spacious. He knew that it was here that he would grow into a giant monster, which would soon completely devour Synthesis Group. A team of office workers was already walking towards them. They smiled friendlily. When Larry said that he was ready to give them the CEO of the company, everyone turned towards Jack. Larry told Jack that these were the people with whom they would work together and asked the boy to introduce himself to them. Jack introduced himself as Lucas Wilson and said that he was also glad to meet everyone. Larry was surprised and said that Jack knew English very well and spoke like a local. Naturally, Jack knew English very well. It was necessary when working at Synthesis Group. Jack wanted to know a foreign language better than people with a good academic education, so he studied it thoroughly, tirelessly. He said that although it was wrong to talk about work immediately after the meeting, he asked to find out information about one company. Larry said he approved of Lucas's enthusiasm and asked what company he was talking about. Jack said that we were talking about the Bill Market Company. The office employees began asking if they had heard something, and if Lucas really needed information about the Bill Market Company. Jack said that this is where the first investment will be made. At the age of 12, Bill Martin started his own business selling postage stamps, selling them directly, then opened several businesses, achieving success in marketing. Soon, using his acquired business skills, he founded the world-class computer company Bill Market. Larry asked in surprise how Lucas knew about this company at that age. Jack added that in addition to Bill making $2,000 from stamp sales, he made a lot of money from newspaper subscriptions in high school. Larry asked if Lucas was going to spend a fortune just for a story about Bill's childhood. But Jack replied that if he could earn that much as a child without having a rich grandfather, then that says something. After all, it is quite obvious that a person like Bill Martin will earn a lot in the future. Larry ordered the employees to urgently find all the information about Bill Martin and his company Bill Market. A few days later, Jack stood in front of the burger shop and did not understand why Larry had brought him here. Larry explained that Bill Market's investment potential was too low, and Bill agreed to meet him informally over a simple lunch. Larry added that Bill received $30 million, and last year he might have wanted to meet Lucas. Jack understood that in investing the main thing is to catch the right moment and understand when to enter a project and when to get out of it. Larry said that perhaps they were late with the meeting, and Bill most likely would not accept their offer since he had difficulty getting this meeting. They entered the burger shop. Jack looked around naturally. There was a middle-class contingent here. At the very end of the hall, Bill was sitting by the window. He waved his hand at them from afar. Jack looked at Bill for a few seconds. At 27, he was the youngest among the 500 richest people in the world, and at 34, he would claim 5th place in America with a fortune of more than $20 billion. Larry noticed how surprised Bill was looking at Lucas, and explained that the boy was his fan. Jack and Larry sat down at the table, and Bill shook Larry's hand. Bill immediately asked to get down to business. In 15 minutes, he had to return to the company. Larry didn't hesitate and immediately said that they represent the Fantasy Entertainment Company and want to invest in the Bill Market Company. Bill continued to chew his burger, and when Larry was about to take the documents out of his briefcase, he stopped him. Bill replied that he did not need any investments, and the amount that he now had was just right for him. Jack thought that, naturally, $30 million was enough for him to live a carefree life and prosper his company. Larry added that he is aware of the financial situation of Bill Market. But if the proposed conditions are exceptional, is there really no opportunity to reconsider his decision? Bill told Larry that he only needed funds to expand the company, and besides, Bill had the perfect plan. Bill continued that he doesn't do stupid things like increase company stock to make money. Jack and Larry looked at each other. It seemed that the conversation was not going well, and the deal might not take place. Jack asked to speak and said that Bill's past is Lucas's present, and Bill's present is Lucas's future. Bill replied that the guy dreamed too much, then added that as a child he was slightly different from others. Jack replied that he was also not like other children his age, and was even different from Bill. Bill stopped eating his burger, looked closely at Lucas, and asked what was so special about him. Jack replied that Bill, at 12 years old, had $2,000 billion on hand from the sale of stamps. Lucas now has the same amount and has $15 billion from the sale of land. Bill put down his burger and asked about the amount Lucas owned. Jack continued by saying that he doesn't know where Bill spent his $2 billion, but he, Lucas, knows how he uses his 15. Jack said that he was going to become a major shareholder of the Bill Market company. Bill was surprised to ask Larry, having such ambitions, if Lucas was his son. Larry's answer threw Bill into a real shock. Larry replied that Lucas was his boss. Bill asked Lucas a direct question. How did he know that he sold stamps at the age of 12 and thus made money? At that second, Jack thought that he had seriously screwed up, had the story of Bill's childhood not yet been published, but he had to somehow get out of it. He looked at Bill slyly and said if he had not found out everything about Bill, would he have acted and invested such a huge amount? Then Bill asked the question, if Lucas is going to become a major shareholder and Bill is not accepting investments now, then how does the guy think about achieving this? He slyly added that regarding the composition of the board of directors, he has more votes, so his opinion will be decisive. Jack replied that, most likely, next year the Bill Market would register on the investment exchange, and Lucas would immediately buy back the outstanding shares. He would instantly become a major shareholder with $15 billion, and by the end of this year, Lucas would have 10 more. Bill became thoughtful when Lucas told him that he would become a board member and actively manage the company. Bill listened, and Jack continued to say that, having accepted his own investment, he, as a shareholder, would transfer his votes to them until he decided to sell them again. Jack assured Bill that he would have the right to buy back the shares first, and at the market price. At this point, Larry interrupted Lucas and told Bill that he and Lucas needed to talk for a minute. He told Lucas that this was not an issue that could be resolved so easily because the preferred right to purchase shares on the market was more expensive. Larry added that this is correct from the point of view of protecting management rights and the ability to dispose of votes. Bill saw the way Larry acted with Lucas and said that he didn't believe the guy was the boss, but now he doesn't doubt it. He turned to the guy and asked his name. Jack lied and said his name was Howard Wilson. Bill looked at the guy and suggested discussing the situation in more detail. The plane was flying from New York to Seoul, on which Jack and Larry were returning. On the plane, Larry said that he would be busy with investment negotiations, but Bill refused all $15 million. Something needed to be done with the remaining funds. Jack replied that Larry should consult with the staff and offer him options that Lucas could consider. Larry said that he was very surprised by his conversation with Bill. It seemed to him that Lucas was just a smart child, but Larry's adult brain refuses to understand this. Jack replied that he was born again. He was from the future, which would come 30 years from now. So the knowledge of a 40-year-old man remained in his head. Larry seemed offended and said that he shouldn't joke so stupidly. He's not a fan of science fiction. Although at about this age you begin to understand where the past is, where the present is, and where the future is. Larry added that there is no need to doubt the intellectual level of a 40-year-old person who is engaged in economic activities. The chairman of Synthesis Group sat and read the aide's report, who said that Lucas had gone to New York with Larry Baker, and that the trip was more like a business trip than sightseeing and shopping. He then added that Lucas Wilson is currently spending money to create a film company. Richard instantly looked away from studying the report received from the New York branch and looked at his assistant in surprise. He clarified that the design is almost completed, and production is already planned to begin next year. That is, Lucas is putting together 2 projects at the same time. The chairman looked menacingly at the assistant and asked if he understood correctly that the film company was being created with Lucas's money. The assistant replied that it was true. Lucas had allocated $4 billion for this. Richard was angry. He believed that his grandson had screwed up by failing to spend his money wisely. The chairman added that it seemed that he had not trained Lucas enough if he was able to spend $4 billion so recklessly. Even if Lucas did it for the sake of his father. Still, if you feel that there is no hope of profit, you should not spend the funds. The assistant dared to object, answering that it was quite possible that Heinrich's films would become profitable. The chairman replied that Heinrich had been a slacker all his life. There was no question of a company. And besides, the film business is not easy to promote, because then where do failed films come from? The assistant thought that if any of the films were successful, the chairman would decide that Lucas's ability to invest correctly was incredible. Already at home, Jack looked through the documents relating to his investment plan. He invested about $9 billion in the bill market, and also selected candidates where he could invest the remaining $6 billion. Now Jack was getting acquainted with the constituent documents of the Nanosoft company, whose director was Chris Knight. Larry said he doesn't know much about the computer industry, but they say it's a little dangerous to invest in. Jack asked what the danger was, and Larry replied that the company was trying to release new computer systems, but the market reaction was not very favorable. This year, their third version is being released, and it is possible that it will fail in addition. Their customer is preparing to develop their own operating system, and may terminate the contract with Nanosoft. Jack said that next year drones will be released in 2 versions, or it's not so important, the difference is only a year or 2. Larry thought about it and said that he would choose Nanosoft. Jack wondered how Larry planned to invest in an area he wasn't particularly familiar with. Jack said that he would do it, he was lucky, so everything would work out for them. A minute later, Jack turned to Larry and asked him to sell the remaining lands, to which Larry replied that he could wait a little until the price for them reached its peak. But Jack replied that he needed more funds for the company in New York, because having already invested existing funds in 2 companies, Fantasy Entertainment needed additional capital for investment. Jack told Larry to use half of the remaining land after selling it, and hold the rest for now. Larry replied that he would do everything as Lucas said and left the room. Jack understood that he was using only fragmentary information about the future, and in fact he didn't really know anything. He had never been a stockbroker, but just an office worker. Jack couldn't remember exactly when and which company became a good place to invest. But the one thing that would make his firm invincible over the next 30 years was movies. He knew most of the Hollywood films that brought huge profits to film companies, and also film investors who have never suffered financial failure. This alone will make you call yourself Hollywood Midas, who, according to legend, could turn everything into gold. A few days later, Larry was again at Lucas's house. He said that he had brought something interesting. He said he got it in New York, and Lucas should take a look at it. The folder was called Hollywood Production, Investments, and the Real State of Affairs. After looking at the documents, Jack said that he wanted to show this to his father and convince him that he could really make money from this. And then Jack came across a project for one of the films, which was almost at the stage of approval for distribution. He thought that if his father's company was responsible for adapting and distributing the film domestically, he could put pressure on theater owners to push it into release. Jack jumped up and asked Larry if this movie was actually in the making. Larry looked and replied that it was so. The film was now in the production workshop, but it was a small family film in which both the director and the actors were new. After reading a few more pages, Larry realized that the main role was played by a child, the same age as Lucas. Putting the documents on the table, Larry said that it was better to exclude this idea from the options. To Lucas's questioning look, Larry replied that the film Warrior was originally supposed to cost $11 million, but the budget grew, and the film was transferred to Wolf's company, where it is under consideration. Larry added that he doesn't know much about it, but since the film's production is stalled at the initial stage, he doesn't think anything good will come of it. Jack shouted that he definitely wanted to invest in this film as quickly as possible and as much as possible. Larry sternly answered that investments in cinema are 2 different things. If shares fall in price, then you simply suffer small losses. And if the film does not turn out to be a box office success, then it is just money thrown away. In cinema, there is no timing in which you need to jump out. Larry sharply said that this time he is categorically against this idea. This is not an investment, but a gambling game. Jack continued to insist on his own. He asked to try such investments once, and in the future he would remain silent about investments. He saw Larry's look. His reaction was completely understandable to Jack, but he had to seize this chance. Jack did not want to miss the opportunity to establish himself in Hollywood as an investment company. Even if something goes wrong, it is his money, and he promised his parents to use it as he wants. He told Larry that he didn't see a problem even if all of Fantasy Entertainment's money disappeared, because the richest man in this country was his grandfather. It was clear that Larry was angry, but he remained silent. In the end, he said he would do as Lucas wanted. Jack told him to get the rights to distribute the film and adapt it in Korea. Larry replied that it would not be difficult, because they were the only investors who decided to invest. He added that he would try to organize everything as quickly as possible. Larry headed for the exit, but Lucas stopped him and invited him to have dinner with his family. Larry refused, saying that he was not in the mood to sit at the same table with them right now. At that moment, Jack thought that he had made Larry very angry, but his anger would disappear as soon as he saw the box office revenue from the film. And then the day came when Jack held in his hands the necessary founding documents for a film called Home Alone. As soon as Nanosoft released a new operating system, the price of their shares immediately increased. Larry, who had previously been angry with Lucas, now smiled in surprise and said that the $8 million invested in the film would pay off within a few years. This film earned 6 times its cost, and that's just in America. Larry understood that Lucas was now the richest kid in the world. Lucas told Larry that he was already starting high school, and the semester was starting in March. At that moment, the father entered the room. It was clear that he was very dissatisfied. Heinrich said that he was busy, and asked him to quickly explain the essence of the matter. Larry asked him if this unrest was due to the fact that the film created by Heinrich still could not find time for distribution. The father replied that before the new year, all the cinemas were cleared, and last year during the Christmas season this film was a hit, and this year the premiere will be released in Korea. Larry smiled. Is this film really so good that all the cinemas have been cleared and are waiting for the Home Alone film to appear? The father added that this family film is what is needed during the new year. It is already breaking all records for the distribution of comedy films, so there is no place for his film at the box office. My father sadly said that as soon as Home Alone starts showing in all cinemas, they won't even remember about his film. Larry and Lucas looked at each other and listened that this film has some rich investor, but now everything is in such a mess and he doesn't know who he is. Heinrich said that he needed to meet with that guy so that he knew the dates and could adjust. Larry put his hand on Heinrich's shoulder and said that first he should bow to him, because he knows who the distributor of this film is. Heinrich jumped up and shouted. He demanded that he urgently be told the name of this man. Jack called out to his father and told him to start by releasing his film during the holidays. The father looked at his son in surprise, and Larry said that from now on Heinrich should listen carefully to Lucas and do what he says. Then there will definitely be no failure. Larry took out a document from his briefcase and handed it to Heinrich. Heinrich tried to understand the contents of the document, and Larry said that you just need to sign and Heinrich will become the owner of the film Home Alone. The son explained to him about the conditions, which stated that only those cinemas that would show Heinrich's film would receive the right to distribute the film. Heinrich did not fully understand what kind of plan came up with Larry and Lucas. He took the documents and, leaving the room, said that he would talk more later. First, he needed to deal with this. When Heinrich came out, Larry openly laughed, calling him a fool because he didn't even ask where they got it from. Jack asked Larry to prepare a list of films that would be shot this year. He wanted to invest another $200 million. Larry replied that maybe once was enough. Perhaps it was just a lucky chance that they turned out to be profitable. Jack asked Larry what percentage of the profits fantasy entertainment employees receive, and Larry replied that it was 22%. Jack calculated something on a piece of paper and showed his calculations to Larry. He looked carefully and said that he would prepare everything and contact Lucas. As Jack watched Larry go, he thought that until he graduated from high school, he needed to focus more on his studies. He lay down on the bed and thought that he had to maintain good academic performance in order to meet the expectations of the chairman of Synthesis Group, his grandfather. Over the next 3 years, he will only choose films that were successful at the box office, but for now he can relax a little. At that moment, my mother looked into the room and asked if they had finished their business. Lucas told his mother that he was free and very hungry. Mom replied that this is exactly what she came for, to call Lucas to dinner. One of the following days, Jack was sitting in the room and saw Dad in a hurry somewhere and looking at his watch. The father happily said that today his film was released in theaters and he personally wanted to check how things were going. Suddenly, he saw articles in newspapers that were lying on the table. All the newspapers attacked the Motors Group company. Jack didn't remember that this happened in 91 and 97. The wave of the financial crisis hit the Motors Group, and the Prestige company absorbed it already in 98. Has the future really changed that much because of Jack's intervention, or is this just a one-time act of criticism of the company? Jack knew that tomorrow they had to go to his grandfather, but he asked his mother to let him go today. Mom replied that she didn't mind letting her son go after breakfast. She hoped that grandfather would like it. Jack asked why his mother did not go to the premiere with his father, to which she replied that if there were no spectators there, she would embarrass his father. It was so long ago that Jack could not remember anything about his father's film, and perhaps that the film did not exist at all. Jack simply gave his father a chance, and how his life will turn out depends only on him. Arriving at his grandfather's house, he was informed that he was receiving guests. Jack said that he would wait for him in the living room. Jack, remembering the articles in today's newspapers and comparing it with the morning meeting at his grandfather's, wondered if they were connected. Jack really wanted to know what kind of discussions were currently going on in the office of the chairman of Synthesis Group. There was actually a lot to listen to. The chairman listened carefully, thought a little, and asked if Philip could intercept Motors Group. Philip replied that, as the chairman said, the best way to achieve second place in the industry, and if they take over the Motors Group, then he will do everything to get first place in the country. Richard said that he was entrusting this matter to him. It was necessary at all costs to get this company within a year. The chairman then added by saying that if he succeeded, Richard would hand over the entire automobile industry to him. Assistant Michael thought that handing over this part of the industry to Philip was tantamount to handing over the entire corporation, had the chairman found a successor. Richard advised Philip not to make mistakes and take care of everything. In addition, he could not attend meetings for now, but spend time completing the assigned task. As Philip left the office, the aide asked the chairman if now was the best time to announce his successor. Richard replied that he was not going to give the Synthes Group to Philip, but only the automotive industry. The chairman then added that by giving away the shares to the automobile industry, there would be no problem in protecting the management right. Michael replied that, naturally, he would have more money now, but he would still be disappointed not to get what he wanted. The chairman said that he noticed how Philip rushed to carry out the assignment. Seeing the light, he thought the same way as the assistant suggested, about complete power over Synthes Group. Jack waited until everyone left the office, leaving the chairman alone, and said that grandfather works even on holidays. Richard replied that there was nothing to be done. Running a company is not easy. But he had already finished everything and was free. Approaching the table, Jack noticed the same newspaper with the same articles and realized that the state of affairs of the Motors Group was discussed at the meeting. Jack then said that he noticed Uncle Philip was in a good mood as he had just left his grandfather's office, to which Richard replied that perhaps it was because of the upcoming holidays. Jack realized that there must be some important information for him, and he told his grandfather that he was curious about something. He noticed a brown folder on the table, on which was written the need to restructure the auto industry and government support measures. His grandfather really behind all this. Jack told the chairman that he had read in the newspapers about the current commotion about the Motors Group, and he thought it was strange. Richard asked why he thought this was strange. Jack replied that when Synthes Group appears in the newspapers, grandfather usually gets angry and asks to find out whose hands it was. The chairman replied that Lucas had clearly noticed this, but newspapers make money by selling their articles. And articles that seem to have nothing to do with money, such as traffic jams, provide information for highway expansion and construction projects. Jack said that companies that build roads would make money from such an article. Grandfather laughed and said that was so. Then Jack asked who benefits from articles about Motors Group. The chairman replied that perhaps this would be beneficial to a competitor who would like to greatly undermine the economy of the Motors Group. Jack said that it might be the Auto Prestige Company, but he thought that perhaps it would benefit Grandpa too. The chairman remained silent, only stroked his grandson on the head. And then Jack realized, the company he started drooling over, who could have known that Richard would target Motors Group first. But as far as Jack remembered, the Motors Group was supposed to be absorbed by the Auto Prestige Company. Would grandfather really fail? The next day, Richard Wilson decided to gather the whole family at his residence. The chairman's son Heinrich and his family were also invited to this dinner. Jack watched the family members. They were probably all eating in silence and wondering why the head of Synthes Group had invited them and gathered them at one table. After some time, Kevin turned to Heinrich and said that he had heard that his film had been released. Heinrich replied that this was indeed the case, and the cinemas were completely sold out at the premiere. He added that this is only the first day, and it is unknown what will happen by the end of the film release. And then the chairman's daughter-in-law turned to Martha, calling her not by name, but simply her brother's wife, and ordered her to bring more soup for her. Martha immediately stood up and was going to fulfill her request. Jack looked at his aunt with hatred. She was already used to communicating with his mother this way, and now she was again giving her instructions. He looked at Heinrich. His father was sitting with his head down, although he was in pain, but he did not dare to make a scandal, and it seemed was also accustomed to such treatment. And at that moment, the chairman handed his plate to his daughter-in-law and menacingly ordered her to bring him a bowl of soup. She asked if he was really addressing her. The chairman became angry and asked if she, being so young, had trouble hearing. The daughter-in-law immediately ran up to the chairman to pour him some soup. Heinrich and Martha looked at the chairman in amazement, and complete silence reigned in the room. Having received more soup, Richard simply dug into the contents of the plate. He did not want to eat. He simply put his daughter in her place. Jack looked at the chairman. He had just officially and publicly recognized his father and mother as part of the entire family. Finally, its members would no longer bother his parents. Of course, Jack was immensely grateful to his grandfather for such an act. But what can you do? He had to stab him in the back in the near future. He quickly finished his plate, left the table, and taking advantage of the fact that the whole family was in the dining room, headed to his grandfather's office. Jack needs to look at the report that was on the chairman's desk yesterday. To stop the chairman from carrying out his plan, Jack needs to find out all the details. He took the folder and sat down on the floor to carefully examine its contents. Jack tried to understand everything that was written in the documents as quickly as possible. because Richard could enter the office at any minute. The next moment, Jack realized that this was not a report on the acquisition strategy of the Motors Group. This was a plan for the need to consolidate the automobile industry and support measures, which is government policy. Jack was beginning to understand that if Auto Prestige absorbed Motors Group, there were concerns about a monopoly in the automobile market, and this method would make his grandfather's company, Wilson Motors, the most suitable buyer. All this said that grandfather was developing a policy that would benefit him and would present all these documents to the government, which would implement this policy. Jack understood that then he would not be able to use it, and he did not know what to do next. The next second, he heard footsteps in the corridor, which were quickly approaching the office. There was nowhere to run. The chairman was already standing in front of his grandson, who was sitting on the floor, and was interested in what he was doing here. Jack sat in front of Richard, and documents from his folder were treacherously scattered on the floor. He felt like a complete fool, and if he said something wrong now, the trust his grandfather had built over the years would be lost in an instant. Jack decided that in this situation it was better to tell the truth, distorting it a little. It would be better than a ridiculous lie. He made a guilty face and replied that he was just curious. It was clear that the chairman was angry. He asked what exactly interested Lucas in his documents. Jack replied that after reading articles about the Motors Group at home and coming to his grandfather and seeing this folder on the table, he decided that it was all somehow connected. He apologized to his grandfather for looking at them without permission. The chairman was silent, and Jack waited to see how Richard would react to his words, because this is the head of Synthesis Group, and he should have liked his grandson's excuse. Richard said that Lucas is so small, but he is already interested in the economic situation by reading newspaper articles. Grandfather praised Lucas for his eagerness to find answers to his questions by trying to use relevant materials. When asked by the chairman whether Lucas had satisfied his curiosity, Jack replied that he had looked just a little and had not yet understood anything. Richard replied that he was sorry that his grandson did not have time to find the answers he needed. But from now on, he should not enter the office without his grandfather's permission. Jack apologized again and put the folder on the table. He managed to resolve this situation, but the future is a problem. Leaving the chairman's office, Jack realized that he thought that in the folder with documents, he would find a plan for the acquisition of Motors Group. But it turned out that this is not so. We need to find another way to change this situation. Jack needed to confront not his grandfather, but the government. This means that it is necessary to ensure that the government is not interested in the presented Synthesis Group project regarding the automotive industry. A few days later, Richard received information that the chairman of the auto concern company, Claude Johnson, had bought the land in advance, and the politicians had received bribes. The chairman's assistant advised that for now we should refrain from contacts with the Blue House and postpone the purchase of shares in Motors Group. Richard was angry that the government had told him not to speculate on land, and he agreed with Michael that he should abandon his plan. Jack was drinking juice and thought that it would take some time for chaos to begin, but the information he posted anonymously in the media would attract public attention. This was enough for the government to reject the proposal of the chairman of Synthesis Group. Of course, the political circles will be shaken for a while. They will not have time to worry about anything else. But the most important thing is that Jack managed to save the Motors Group. Larry Baker was sitting in his office working with some documents when Jack walked in on him. He invited Larry to leave Invest Group and join Fantasy Entertainment. Larry replied that Lucas makes decisions on his own that have positive results, and he does not see the point of moving to Lucas's company, although he has 2% of the shares in it. Jack suggested that Larry create a branch in Korea, leave some of the funds there and manage them. Larry continued to work and did not want to discuss this issue. Jack said that he knew about a secret fund that Richard entrusted to Lucas, considering him very capable. Larry looked at Lucas in surprise. Is it possible that the chairman shares such things with this child, and Lucas receives important information from his grandfather? And Jack continued, saying that he would only take the money that he invested in the bill market, and Larry could manage his grandfather's fund and the rest of the money. Larry immediately looked up from his papers and asked if Lucas was really going to take money out of the bill market. Jack responded positively and added that he plans to do it next year. Then Larry could not stand it and jumped up, shouting that Lucas had gone crazy, because bill market is a golden duck that brings high profits every day. The decision to sell shares that have never fallen since entering the stock exchange is the height of madness. Lucas replied that they would talk about the shares later, but now he asked for his answer to his proposal. Larry got up from the table and went to the window. Now he considered Lucas a disgusting kid. After a minute, Larry turned to Lucas and replied that he had something to finish, and they would talk about it later. Jack thought that he would accept any conditions. He now needed an adult like Larry, who did not treat him like a child. In addition, he is smart and experienced. Most importantly, he has a career that is unmatched in the world. Until Jack became an adult, Larry was the only person who could replace him. Larry asked what Lucas was going to spend the money from the bill market on. Jack gave a simple and clear answer. He wants to invest it in Japan. Larry was angry again, he said. Lucas reads newspapers and knows what the greatest crisis Japan is facing. To which Jack replied that the best opportunities always come in the greatest crisis, and Larry knows this. Larry said that this is what successful people say, and only 1 in a million can take advantage of an opportunity in a crisis. Everyone else simply perishes. Jack told Larry not to rule out the possibility that Lucas was the man in a million. Philip called his son to him and asked him how his meeting with his grandfather went. The son replied that his grandfather advised him to go to Europe and stay there until he was 30. Philip asked if his son had flared up after such words from his grandfather. The guy replied that he was no longer an idiot. He simply said that he would try hard and left his grandfather's office. One day, Philip decided to gather the children together and discuss very important issues regarding their future. Now that they were adults, he told them to remember his words. Grandfather would definitely watch their every move. If unpleasant rumors reach him, this will definitely affect not only themselves, but also other people. Philip then turned to his eldest daughter, saying that as soon as she graduated from university, he would introduce her to a decent guy. She would have to get married. Rosalina decided to object that now no one gets married immediately after university unless after a few years. Philip answered sharply. All they did was be born with the blood of their grandfather. Thanks to this, they can live in such prosperity and well-being. And if it comes to the grandfather's mind to abandon them, then they will no longer be able to enjoy half of how they live now. The son replied that he did not fully understand where his father was going with this conversation. Philip replied, "Haven't they noticed how their grandfather has changed lately? And now his favor is focused on their younger uncle Heinrich and cousin Lucas." The son agreed that his grandfather was kind to Lucas, but he was not the person to change his attitude towards his son just for the sake of his grandson. Philip said he had heard that despite his busy schedule, their grandfather found time to watch a film made by his son Heinrich. After a short silence, Philip invited the children to draw their own conclusions and compare how their grandfather treated them and how he treated Lucas. Then he reminded them of their grandfather's age, and no one knows how much longer he has left. Philip ordered the children to visit the chairman's house more often and not create problems for him, and when Cyntha's group falls into his hands, they will be able to behave as they please. He said that the conversation was over, and the children obediently left their father's office. Philip recalled that last year he was supposed to get the Motors Group. Since then, the remaining problems were resolved by his father without his knowledge, and the unresolved issues of the new branches, which Philip was dealing with, were resolved personally by his father. There were rumors within the company that the succession structure would change. Branch directors began to argue with Philip more often and report to the chairman about his actions. Philip was clearly aware that Richard Wilson had changed a lot, and he was vaguely aware of the reason. And the nephew, who was never perceived as a threat, is now turning the whole house upside down. Philip understood that in such a situation, even if the children work hard, they will not be able to become owners of Cyntha's Group. Fantasy Entertainment Company established a company in Korea, and Larry Baker was appointed as a representative of both companies. Jack didn't feel much change in their relationship, but Larry stopped immediately objecting when Jack expressed his opinion. He began to listen more, and when Jack expressed his opinion, which was different from Larry's, he objected reasonably based on data. Larry sat opposite Jack and advised him not on part, but on all of the bill market stocks. Jack replied that they received a profit of 100 times more than their investment. This is quite enough, and there is no reason to be greedy. Larry took documents out of his briefcase and, putting them on the table, said that this is information about a company in which he can invest. But he is not entirely sure. Starting to look through the documents, Jack said that last year they had quite a profit, and this is a large and well-established company. Larry explained that they are developing IT technologies, and as this area grows, so does the company. Jack, seeing the name of the company, Power Group, had already identified a company for investment, but out of respect for Larry, asked to prepare a list. Larry replied that he would do everything he could not even imagine that they would choose the same company. Jack asked Larry what he meant when he said he wasn't entirely sure about the company he'd chosen. Larry replied that this is a stable company and is unlikely to need investment, and its founder is a third-generation Japanese-Korean. Jack knew that the third-generation Japanese-Korean was Mr. Kim, the man who wrote myths about success. Jack asked Larry if they planned to go public, to which Larry replied that there was no information about this. Jack decided that there was still a chance. He had only seen a few articles about the internet, so he did not know the exact timing. Jack remembered his grandfather's words that everything in the world has its price. However, the price is individual for each person, and if the conditions are right, they will sell anything. Larry asked Jack how much money he was willing to give in the end, and Jack replied that he would like to hear it from Larry. Larry offered to pay 5 times more for the shares than their nominal price with such data. After the shares were listed on the stock exchange, the profit could be 30%. Jack replied that he was not sure that the company would be interested in such an offer. Larry said that this is why he doubts it, because there are many investors who are ready to offer the same conditions. Jack replied that in this case, it is necessary to offer not 5, but 10 times more, and in case of competition, raise it to 50. Larry wanted to object harshly, but the next second he covered his mouth with his hand to remain silent. Jack told Larry that the Bill Market company has already grown 100 times. Why can't this happen with Power Group? Larry replied that Power Group is not a manufacturer like Bill Market. It is just a distributor. They can lose money. It is like gambling. Jack replied that they could not leave their opponents in the game and leave themselves. There is no poker in which you can play alone. You just need to wait until the end. Larry smiled and said that since Lucas had such deep knowledge and luck in gambling, he should try to join this game. He added that Lucas must remember that more often than not, the end of such games is ruin, but he will raise the stakes. Jack replied that this would be the last time until he became an adult. A few days later, there was a package of documents on Jack's desk. Larry purchased 5 million shares of the Power Group company, paying for each 35 times its original cost. Larry said that now all that remains is to wait and hope for Lucas's luck, to which the guy replied that everything will be fine. While Jack was opening his juice, Larry asked if he had changed his mind about selling all the Bill Market shares. Jack handed a jar of juice to Larry and replied that they had already increased their investment 100 times and there was no point in holding on to it. They needed to buy more shares with the money from the sale of Bill Market. Opening the second bottle of juice, Jack announced that he was starting high school next year and would have to focus on his studies. Larry praised him for his diligence and asked if Jack intended to enroll in the future to study business administration and economics. Jack replied that he wanted to go to law school. He explained that his grandfather is the best entrepreneur in Korea, and Larry studied economics in England. Both are nearby, so why does he need a university? Larry asked in surprise if Lucas was really going to become a judge in the future. Jack replied that he just wanted to show that Wilson, the third generation, was good at school. Because until now, students at the prestigious university from wealthy families were not good enough to get into law school. Jack was sitting in his grandfather's living room drinking tea when the chairman asked if Lucas had chosen a school to attend for his senior year. Jack replied that he would go to a regular school. He did not need to study abroad. The grandfather criticized Henry for not caring about his son's future and added that he would find out about a prestigious school in Switzerland. But Jack objected, saying that he would study at the local university. Jack explained that the most points required are for the faculties of law and medicine, and since Lucas is more of a humanities student, he chooses the first. The chairman excitedly asked if his grandson was going to become a judge or prosecutor, and Lucas laughed and replied that he would be a businessman and corporate owner. Grandfather asked why then enroll in law school. Jack replied that few rich children went to law school at a prestigious university in Seoul, and his grandfather would be proud of him. Richard remembered how proud the president of Prestige was at the meeting of large corporations. It was a day when one of the main topics was the admission of his eldest grandson to that same university. But Richard knew what tricks he had resorted to. According to rumors, not only the Secretariat, but also a dozen correspondents from the university and the Ministry of Economics were mobilized for admission. The faculty where it was required to score the fewest points was chosen. It was either the faculty of philosophy or history. If this was an honest admission, then his grandson would not be able to score points even for these faculties. But law school is a completely different matter. All that remained was to recognize a person's mental abilities. And now Lucas wants to prove that he is one of those capable people, just so that his grandfather can be proud of his grandson. There were many people who brought riches to Richard, but no one brought him happiness. And now the youngest Wilson makes him happy. The chairman said that if Lucas enters this university at the most prestigious faculty, he will buy his grandson everything he wants. Jack thought that Richard should remember his promise because he didn't want some foreign car. He wanted the power of the chairman of Synthis Group. In '94, the shares of the Power Group company became public, and the price per share was the highest on the stock exchange. Mr. Kim, the president of the company, announced that he is going to implement the takeover of one of the companies, but is still making a suitable choice. By this time, Jack's investment of $230 million had turned into $850 million, generating a profit of $620 million. The game worked because Jack managed to get out of the game in time before the Power Group's financial bubble burst, and he devoted all 3 years to his studies. He invested in Hollywood films as a hobby from time to time. Lucas's brother Jimmy graduated from school without major incident, and since he did not have enough credits to get into a decent university, he was sent to America to study. Jimmy received little attention from his family and no expectations were placed on him. And now all attention was focused on Lucas, the only Wilson High School student. Some people watched his grades with curiosity. Only his parents and grandfather looked at him with hope. The chairman was bragging to someone on the phone that his youngest grandson was ranked 39th in the country in the natural sciences, and in 10th place in the humanities. The official results at the university had not yet been announced, and the grandfather had already received a note with his grandson's scores. Richard flipped through the address book on his phone and thought about who else could boast about his grandson's successes. The chairman invited the head of the PR group into the office, showed him a note, and ordered him to quietly leak this information to the media. The manager inquired about the purpose of this assignment, to which Richard replied that everyone thinks that managers use money and power to ensure that their children study in prestigious institutions. And now photographers and reporters will know that Wilson Jr. achieved everything on his own, without the financial support of the chairman of Synthesis Group. And this idea worked out in Heinrich's house. There was always a large number of reporters who constantly followed the life and successes of Lucas. Throughout the year, Jack prepared with teachers individually for each subject. The money spent on teachers would be enough to pay the salaries of these journalists for 10 years in advance. Reporters were discussing that Lucas was only 6 points short of first place, which now belonged to a student from Jeju Island. Jack told them that they could go to this island and do a report there, and just write about it what grandfather would like. Jack added that grandfather would be pleased to know that Lucas studied mainly from textbooks, and all sorts of reference books helped him. On January 1st, 1997, the chairman gave a big reception in one of his own hotels. Everyone who talked to Richard noticed that he was in high spirits. Jack was also among those invited. He perfectly noticed that most of the attention of those around him was focused on him. Kevin approached him and decided to congratulate him on a good interview. He named Jack as a future prosecutor and added that in the future he plans to entrust him with the transfer of inheritance. Jack replied that he did not intend to be a prosecutor, but to become a corporate mergers and acquisitions lawyer. Kevin asked in surprise where Lucas got such confidence, and Jack replied that his grandfather decided so. It was hard not to notice Kevin's smile, who was glad that his grandfather saw Lucas only as a lawyer and not as the head of Synthesis Group. Kevin asked what Lucas himself thought, whether he wanted to become a lawyer himself. Jack understood that the most useful of the relatives was his cousin, who had a good head and got a good score in the national examinations. Jack could become his competitor in the future, but now he specifically said that his grandfather sees him only as a lawyer. Now, having calmed down, Kevin wanted to make him his ally. Kevin listened to the fact that Jack is not interested in the judicial chair. He needs to apply first, and then we'll see. Kevin agreed with Jack that this is a matter of the future. He just finished school, and there is no need to make decisions now. He finally calmed down and added that as soon as he got tired of delving into the codes of laws, Kevin would give him one of the convenient places in Synthesis Group. Kevin added that he would make his little nerd brother happy and asked Jack to stick around after the event was over. Jack listened as Kevin taught him how good the world was and how pleasant life was. Jack watched Kevin retreat and thought that everything was right. Let him enjoy life and this wonderful world, because in the future he will only have memories from all this. At that moment, Caroline and her husband approached him and said that it would be wonderful if their children studied as well as Lucas, and her husband Oliver added that if there were questions about their studies, Lucas could safely contact him. Jack asked if Oliver had graduated from a prestigious university or had accumulated a large number of points to offer his services, but he replied that he only meant to practice in justice. Caroline added that Lucas could take his uncle as a tutor because he failed in the elections and is not doing anything now. Jack was well aware of Oliver's failure when he took money from Carolina's department store without his grandfather's knowledge, but it wasn't enough to run for Seoul District. Jack saw Caroline's anger at the failure of the boundary and decided to ask Oliver if he was going to run next time. He replied that he was not allowed to stop at the second convocation of the congressman, and he must get into the National Assembly and the Cabinet of Ministers. Jack replied, Oliver should definitely try next year, and besides, Grandpa's in a good mood for this. He added that if they want and are not against it, Lucas will help them and finance the electoral process. Oliver exclaimed joyfully, and Caroline clapped her hands and said that Lucas was very kind and smart. Jack said that even if Grandfather refuses to finance them, he will do it himself, because now Oliver is his teacher. But Oliver asked how Lucas was going to finance it. Lucas reminded him that he had sold the ranch given by his grandfather and put the money in the bank. A lot of interest had accrued on the untouched savings. It was beneficial for Jack that Oliver would get into the National Assembly, because then he would start luring congressmen to his side. Jack, as promised to Kevin, stayed with him after the event and was now sitting next to him in the car. When he asked where they were going, Kevin replied that his uncle wanted to have a drink with him. Getting out of the car, Jack saw a huge house, and Kevin explained that only friends and cousins gather here from time to time. His father almost never comes here. He added that Lucas can also come here whenever he wants. It's quiet and nice here. This villa belonged to Philip Wilson, vice chairman of Synthesis Group, and Jack could not even imagine that he would end up here in this way. The butler ran out of the house to meet Kevin. Kevin asked if those whom he had invited today had arrived. The out-of-breath butler reported that Miss Angelina suddenly had a night shoot and said that she could not come today. Jack understood who he was talking about. Angelina, the actress of the drama, who is now breaking all records for the highest ratings. Kevin got angry, hit the butler, and asked if he didn't say that today was a very important day. Kevin kicked the butler and said that he should have dragged her here by the hair or kidnapped her, but he would definitely bring her. He yelled that if he performed his duties so negligently, it was unlikely that he would receive his next salary. Jack decided to intervene and said that they only came here for this. If Kevin is in a bad mood, then they can just go home. Kevin left the butler alone and said that he had forgotten that Lucas had a good character. And besides, today Lucas is the main hero. He told the butler to leave and added that he was only lucky because Lucas intervened. The butler was already getting into the car and about to leave the house when Lucas called out to him. Jack told him that he would not stay here for long and asked him to wait and take him back. Kevin tried to persuade Lucas to stay until tomorrow and have a blast and then go home together. But Jack replied that he would not stay here for long. Today he was very tired of all the guests who approached him at the party. Suddenly Jack thought that now there was an opportunity that he had never even thought of, so there was no time to waste here. Entering the house, Jack looked with interest at assistant Kevin, who was sitting in the car. He needed to make him his man. Jack and Kevin entered a room with a variety of alcoholic drinks on the table. Kevin suggested they make themselves at home. Kevin took the bottle, opened it, and said that they were starting with light drinks, beer. Jack took a full glass of beer and drank it in one gulp. Then, without pouring into the glass, he took the whole bottle. Kevin chuckled and said that Lucas was a great drinker and probably knew alcohol etiquette. Jack, pouring beer into Kevin's glass, decided to ask him for advice. He hoped that he would like it. Jack put down the bottle and asked Kevin what he thought would be better for Lucas to become, a prosecutor or a lawyer. After emptying another glass, Kevin replied that his grandfather and his father already had similar people with legal degrees. But they are all strangers, and Kevin and Lucas are brothers, although they are cousins. He said that after living in Europe, he realized that no matter how loyal his subordinates may seem, the truth is that they are not, and everyone thinks about their own. Jack thought, Kevin does the same thing and also blames others because of his distrustful personality. Kevin continued. He was well aware that there was a deep gap between those who give and those who receive money, which is difficult to bridge, but cronyism is a different matter. The relationship with my brother is not a take-and-give relationship, but a sharing of finances. Jack drank beer and thought that the real Lucas might have believed this nonsense. But not Jack. Kevin was not going to share anything with anyone, and even sent his little brother Martin to prison. Kevin decided to answer Lucas's question. Who should he become? He said that he doesn't care whether his brother becomes a judge or a prosecutor. He added that Lucas just needs to always be there, and then he will make him the second person in the Synthesis Group company. Kevin said that Lucas is the only one among the brothers who behaves like a person. The rest are useless. They will not have the opportunity to run the company even when they grow up. He saw great potential in Lucas and therefore invites him to join him. Jack wondered if Kevin really believed him that much and wanted to make him his right-hand man, or if this was just a test of him. At that moment, two pleasantly beautiful girls appeared at the door laughing. One of them cheerfully told Kevin that they had not seen each other for a long time. Jack often saw the faces of these famous girls in dramas and various music programs. When one of the girls said it was their first time seeing a new guest, Kevin liked that they showed interest in Lucas and flirted with him. Jack had to disappoint this company by saying that he was tired of the party today and was leaving. He clearly saw that Kevin was not happy with his brother leaving, but he only said that they would see each other later. Jack walked out onto the porch of the house and sighed with relief. It was the first time he'd tried alcohol in Lucas's body and he'd gotten drunk straight away. But now that he'd gotten some fresh air, he felt better. Jack walked up to the car and saw Kevin's assistant dozing. He knocked softly on the closed window to wake him up. Getting into the car, he apologized for keeping himself waiting for a long time, and the assistant replied that Lucas could have sat in the back. It was more comfortable there. Jack replied that he was not his boss, so the seat in the back was uncomfortable for him. The car had left the grounds of Philip Wilson's country house and was now racing along the highway in the direction of Lucas's house. Jack decided to start a conversation and asked if the assistant really worked in the strategic office of the Synthesis Group company. The man looked at the road but was surprised to ask how Lucas knew about this. Jack replied that he often communicates with his grandfather, the chairman of the company, and knows that the strategy department is divided into two parts. The first consists of talented workers graduated from prestigious universities who develop strategic plans. The second consisted of people from second-rate educational institutions who were at the beck and call of immature idiots and cleaned up their shit. Jack said that based on what Kevin's assistant does, he might be in the second group. The man squeezed the steering wheel of the car with force. He felt shame, contempt, and disgrace. But when Jack said that he was luckier than the employees from the first group, the assistant looked at Lucas with bewilderment and incomprehension. Richard Wilson is already 80 after his death. Lucas will have 3 uncles and an aunt who will begin to tear Cyntha's group apart. And Vice Chairman Philip will smear his sword and try to monopolize the company. Then he will be able to sell the family secrets that are known to the assistant for huge amounts of money. The assistant got angry and said that it was all nonsense. He didn't understand what Lucas was trying to say. Jack decided that there was no point in saying anything else. He just closed his eyes and asked them to wake him up when they arrived at Lucas's house. In 1997, the company Stalinvest, which built the steel mill, went bankrupt and burst like a soap bubble, and the battle of animals began, aimed at the mortally wounded prey. In this regard, the chairman of Cyntha's group called an urgent meeting and, having familiarized himself with the sale price of the collapsed enterprise, asked whether this was the correct price. Richard Wilson's vice chairman and eldest son, Philip Wilson, replied that it was. Richard suggested that the Prestige company would also want to get Stalinvest, offering the same amount as Cyntha's group. And since Prestige has already accumulated experience in the field of steel, it will probably get more votes during the purchase than their company. The chairman asked those present how much, in their opinion, could be offered to buy out the Stalinvest company. But everyone was silent. Kevin dared to speak out first and offered an amount slightly less than $2 trillion. Seeing the questioning look of the chairman, he explained that this is the maximum amount that the Cyntha's group company can offer. Richard said that then the Prestige company would win, to which Kevin replied that this is not something for which it is worth taking out a loan and turning the purchase of a company into a struggle for money. The chairman decided to object and said that the sale of Stalinvest is taking place at an open auction, since Kevin is going to fight, if not with money. Kevin considered it necessary to emphasize the fact that in the event of the acquisition of Stalinvest, the Cyntha's group company will undergo an increase in operational efficiency and the development of a new industry. The chairman ordered to study this issue and prepare an appropriate report so that after taking possession of the acquired company, the judges would be impressed. Richard appointed Vice Chairman Philip to be responsible for this process and gave him a period of 1 week. The chairman then asked those present if there would be any other proposals besides what Kevin had voiced. And suddenly he heard an amount that was not much, but exceeded the cost of selling the company Stalinvest. Richard looked carefully at the head of one of his companies and asked him to justify the announced amount. Barry Barton replied that it makes no difference to creditors who acquires this company, and the government will give its approval in any case. Richard said that if Barry offered such an amount, then where to get the missing part to what Kevin offered, to which he replied that their land intended for the construction of residential buildings could be mortgaged. The chairman replied that it was impossible to build and sell apartments on the mortgaged land, besides how he was going to return this amount received from the mortgage. Barton responded that he could figure it out during construction, and the chairman shouldn't worry about it. Richard assumed that if Barry acted illegally, he would take full responsibility, and the chairman would have nothing to do with it. He grinned and said it looked like Barry had privatized a lot of his money if he spoke so confidently about it. Soon the chairman had information about the amount Prestige was offering for the purchase of Stalinvest. It was more than Kevin's amount, but less than the amount offered by Barton. Philip stood in front of his father and asked if he was really going to spend the amount that Barry Barton had announced. He warned the chairman that their company's fund management would be disrupted for some time. Richard looked at his grandson and asked what Lucas thought. Was there really any other way but money? Jack really wanted to know what was in the head of this insidious man, and he asked for a hint. The chairman said that when a person sells a tree, he wants it to go into the hands of someone who has taken good care of it and raised it, and not someone who will cut it down and sell it as firewood. Philip interrupted their conversation and asked if the chairman really assumed that the company Prestige was buying Stalinvest for subsequent resale. Richard replied that no matter what the chairman of Prestige wants to do, it should be taken care of by the person who grew and sold the tree. He looked at his grandson and asked if such a hint was enough for him. Jack responded that once Prestige took over, it would build and sell apartments on the Stalinvest land and then sell the steel mill's equipment to foreign countries. In this situation, Stalinvest will completely disappear. And if Cyntha's group acquires this company and joins the Steel group, it will do everything possible to revive and preserve Stalinvest. Grandfather smiled and replied that perhaps he had given too easy a clue. Jack will think about whether this will work, because Prestige has quite strong connections. Even if their goal is to resell, there will be many people who will support Prestige's decision. Jack looked at the chairman and asked how much Grandfather plans to finance to get the Stalinvest company. Hearing the amount that the chairman named, Philip was horrified, and said that this was unthinkably more than what they had planned and what Prestige could offer. Richard replied that he would give more if he had such an amount. You need to distribute the fish bait correctly for the fishing to be successful. And then Jack came up with a brilliant idea. He needed to involve the media. By using the press and broadcasting, it is possible to put pressure on the judges by saying that the metallurgy industry, which is an important industry in the country, must be saved and preserved. Jack remembered the chairman's words. He told Lucas to keep his eyes open and look closely at what his grandfather was doing, and how to use the civil servants he has cultivated over the past few decades. The chairman checked with Lucas about tomorrow's commencement ceremony, and said that he had already contacted the principal and dean of the university. He gave Lucas useful advice. Sometimes have a drink with useful people, and make sure that later they can help him if necessary. The chairman then added that there was a person waiting for Lucas outside who would henceforth carry out his receipts. The grandson thanked his grandfather and went outside. Jack saw a car parked near the porch and a tall, dark-haired young man who bowed politely when he saw Lucas. He handed over his business card and introduced himself as Thomas Grieg, assistant head of the strategic group department. Thomas walked up to the car, opened the rear passenger door, and said he would take Lucas home. A few minutes into the ride, Jack asked Thomas if Philip Wilson had hired him. Thomas replied that he was working on the orders of the personal assistant to the chairman of Synthesis Group. Jack knew this man. He was his grandfather's close assistant who served him until the very end. When Jack asked who Thomas would send reports to, the head of the strategy department or his grandfather, he was surprised. Jack continued, he said that Thomas wasn't tasked with reporting Lucas's every move, because it was a known fact. Thomas replied that he would inform grandfather's close aide personally, and then asked if there was anything Thomas needed to be more careful with. Jack replied that Thomas should report everything as it is. Now it is his job, and he needs to follow the orders of the boss.